All right, so we should be on. All right, cool. So, all right, the homework review for the fallacy of weak induction, right? Not only were they really distortions of inductive arguments, right? But they also are trying to pass off really bad reasoning that distort those original forms of what would be really good inductive arguments, right? So the fallacies of weak induction, that's what we're doing. And so now we're going to review homework 3.3 Roman numeral 1. So let's get to it. And just like before, right, let's take a look at some of these things. And all right, so the Daily News carried an article this morning about 3 local teenagers who were arrested on charges of drug possession. Teenagers these days are just a bunch of junkies. Now, what fallacy is going on here? Pause to consider. Yes, right? So we're trying to establish from 3 teenagers arrested on drug possession that all teenagers are a bunch of junkies. Is that really true? And can you proceed from a sample of 3 people to generalize about the whole? Hopefully you're noticing that we're explaining why it is the case that number 1 is hasty generalization. So the sample size is 3, yet you didn't even qualify, you didn't like teenagers. Teenagers unqualified as teenagers from in Europe, teenagers in Africa, teenagers in North America, teenagers in South America, teenagers in Asia, right? So like all of this fitting together, you didn't even qualify, right? And even if you were to qualify 3 local teenagers with Louisiana teenagers, again, it would still be hasty generalization. So a sample of 3 doesn't give you any evidence to generalize about the whole of teenagers in general, right? Okay, number 2, we already did. I did that as an example last time, but we're still going to do number 2, right? And I'll read it. If a car breaks down on the freeway, a passing mechanic is not obligated to render emergency road service. For similar reasons, if a person suffers a heart attack on the street, a passing physician is not obligated to render emergency medical assistance. Wait a second. So what's the fallacy going on here? Pause to consider. Yes, that's right. It's the fallacy of weak analogies. The analogy in terms of how physicians care for people is not analogous to how passing mechanics care for cars. Or to put this in a very direct way, cars are not people. And that's why the analogy doesn't obtain, and it's a false analogy and weak analogy that. In other logic textbook, fallacy of weak analogy and fallacy of false analogy are the same word for the same fallacy. Number 3, there must be something to psychical research. 3 famous physicists, Oliver Large, James Jeans, and Arthur Stanley Eddington, took it seriously. Pause to consider. That's right. This is the fallacy of unqualified authority. Physicists study the physical forces of the universe, and psychic phenomena, if it's claimed to be studied scientifically by anybody, it's claimed to be studied by parapsychology, but parapsychology is a field that has since then fallen into disrepute for reasons that there's really no evidence that extrasensory perception or telekinesis or telepathy are real things. And the fact that 3 physicists took it seriously does not actually warrant the conclusion or justify that we should accept there must be something to psychical research. More would certainly be needed to do that, but just relying on the fame or the false expertise of physicists, this is the fallacy of unqualified authority. 4, the secretaries have asked us to provide lounge areas where they can spend their coffee breaks. This request will have to be refused. If we give them lounge areas, next they'll be asking for spas and swimming pools, then it will be racquetball courts, tennis courts, and fitness centers. Expenditures for these facilities will drive us into bankruptcy. So pause to consider, what's this fallacy? That's right, this fallacy is called slippery slope. We started with some administrative assistants wanting a lounge for coffee breaks, and the employer thinks that this will wind up being fitness centers, tennis courts, and racquetball courts, right? We're not going to do number 5. Number 5 is technically no No fallacy. It's an appropriate example of argument from analogy. Number 6 is one of my favorite ones in the whole book. A few minutes after Governor Harrison finished his speech on television, a devastating earthquake struck southern Alaska. For the safety of the people up there, it's imperative that Governor Harrison make no more speeches. What's this? That's right. This is fallacy of false cause. It's saying that he gave a speech and then there was an earthquake. So if we want to prevent earthquakes, Governor Harrison should shut up, whoever Governor Harrison is. So again, I think that that's a lovely example of the fallacy of false cause. Number 7, no one has been able to prove the existence of ESP. We must therefore conclude that ESP is a myth. Pause to consider. Yes, that's right. This is the example of appeal to ignorance. If no one has been able to prove the existence of ESP, can you conclude it's a myth from sheer ignorance alone? No, you cannot. You cannot actually infer anything from sheer ignorance alone, and that's the point of the fallacy. Number 9, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett give millions of dollars to charitable causes every year. It must be the case that all wealthy people give huge amounts of money to charity every year. What do you think? Pause to consider. That's right. That is technically the definition of your sample sizes too. That's fallacy of hasty generalization again, right? Trying to find. So yeah, we have seen all the examples, and I'm going to leave some of these. This Roman numeral 1 only has 15 problems. We've done about 8 of them. So in doing half of them, I've actually covered the amount of fallacies we've seen. So we've seen hasty generalization, false analogy, unqualified authority, slippery slope, right? Fallacy of false cause, and appeal to ignorance. So in this homework review, right? Again, remember, this section really requires us to kind of know the definitions as well as how to apply those definitions to the various scenarios. And my examples on the quiz are extremely inspired by homework. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. All right, okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you for your attention. And remember, keep thinking logically. It really does work if you do these homework problems, right? Because you will be in a good spot for my exam. Thank you. And remember, keep thinking logically if I haven't said that already.